Here's a question for you. How would you like to die? If you could choose any way to go, what would it be? Most of us probably have a fairly similar answer. Quietly, painlessly, in our sleep, surrounded by our loved ones. It's all anyone could ever really want. But perhaps a more interesting question is, how don't you want to die? What are the ways in which you would want to avoid popping your clogs at all costs? You might say something like getting caught in industrial machinery, or having superheated steam cook you alive whilst leaving your nerve endings intact, or maybe a 100% fatal disease like rabies that by the time symptoms appear, it's too late. But in fact, most people don't actually say those things. Instead, the overwhelmingly common answer is a far more realistic one: drowning. No matter who you talk to, drowning is always amongst people's worst ways to die. I have around 31,000 of you lovely people who have subscribed to this channel, which means that statistically this year, one of you will die from drowning. And you'd be in good company being afraid. Those other options might be worse, but they're nowhere near as likely. Drowning, by comparison, is a leading cause of accidental deaths worldwide. No matter who you are, you can still drown like anyone else. It is in fact staggeringly regular. So, what actually happens to a person when they drown? What does it feel like to experience it, and what can we do to prevent it? If you watch one video of mine, let it be this one. It could save your life someday. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the science of drowning itself before we get into what a person experiences when they do drown. Every year, around 260,000 people die by drowning worldwide. And I mean worldwide because it affects every country on Earth. For example, in the United States, the number, according to the CDC, is 3,500 fatal drownings annually. Most of them are children, but we'll get to why in a little bit. If you are the average human being, you can probably hold your breath for about a minute, maybe even a little longer. Some of you might even be adept swimmers who could hold your breath for a few minutes. Some freedivers can hold theirs for as long as 8 minutes on average, and in 2016, a Spanish freediver named Alex Vendrell set a world record by holding his breath for 24 minutes. But regardless, most of you are going to be in that 1 or 2 minute mark. But the thing is, you don't need minutes. Drowning, especially in certain circumstances, can take mere seconds to accomplish. There are a lot of factors that can affect how quickly a person can drown, that really, every situation is different. For example, an adult man of average weight who knows how to swim and is wearing swimwear could get pulled into a rip current at the beach and struggle against the ocean for 5 or 10 minutes before slipping under. Conversely, a toddler wearing regular clothes who falls into a pool whilst hitting their head has only seconds. And that's not even close to an exhaustive list of factors. So you'll see that every drowning seems to be just a little bit different. In general, though, this is how it works. First things first, you hit the water. Whether you fell in or jumped in doesn't really matter, as we're not going into specifics yet. But at some point, for one of many reasons, you start to panic and your fight or flight response kicks in, dumping your system full of adrenaline. But it's not all necessarily chaotic splashing around and yelling for help. It might not seem like it, but drowning is a surprisingly quiet way to die. Eventually you can't fight it any longer, and as you start to get tired, you slip under the surface. At this point, you will have to hold your breath, or rather your body involuntarily does this for you out of an instinct to prevent water from entering the lungs. As you continue to fight, this might last a couple of minutes before one or two things happen. The bloodstream, and thus the brain, isn't getting enough oxygen, which either causes you to fall unconscious, or the panic causes you to gasp for air, you inhale the water, and then fall unconscious. Either way, the result is the same. You aspirate water, and with your body rapidly losing the oxygen it needs to function, you could black out only a short time after being submerged. A lot of different things make this a faster or slower process. Even something like the temperature of the water can bring unconsciousness sooner. At this point, the water fills the lungs, which prevents all oxygen exchange, and you go into hypoxia. At that stage, your organs begin to struggle to function and slowly start to fail. Now, the body can enter a stage called hypoxic convulsion, which looks a bit like a seizure. This will likely be when the body starts to turn blue from the lack of oxygen as it unconsciously jerks around erratically underwater. The final stage is known as cerebral hypoxia, where brain activity starts to shut down as cells die off. The heart will usually stop here as the individual suffers a cardiac arrest. Even at this moment, a person can survive drowning, but only if CPR and first aid are administered immediately. But in most cases that get to this stage, especially when the person remains underwater, clinical death tends to follow. And even if a person were to be rescued at that point, they likely will have gone a significant amount of time without oxygen, and this can cause long-term health complications like breathing difficulties, pneumonia, and permanent physical and mental disability. So, a nasty business all around and definitely best avoided, but the thing is, this picture is missing something. Just learning the science behind drowning doesn't help a person understand the experience of drowning in the same way that understanding how a car works doesn't tell you what it's like to drive one. And it certainly doesn't tell you much about why drowning is one of the worst ways any one of us could go. So, to find what we're looking for, we need to dive a bit deeper. So, what is it about drowning that has such a visceral reaction in people? Well, even though the experience is different for everyone, there are still some common themes, and one of them is defined less by what drowning is and more by what it isn't. See, if you remember, at the start of this video, I asked you how you might prefer to die, and I suppose that most people would say quietly, painlessly, in their sleep, or surrounded by their families. Drowning is nearly the complete opposite of that. It's chaotic, it's traumatic, it's painful, it's deeply isolating. In many ways, it's as far from an ideal death as you could reasonably get. And that, combined with the fact that drowning is so common, creates that natural fear. Now, you might be thinking, Jake, I'm a strong swimmer, even in shallow water, I'll be fine. And you're probably right. Probably. Because you would be astonished how easy it is for a person to drown at pretty much any depth. Every year, people of all ages drown in bathtubs, shallow lakes, small puddles, even sewers. Adults tend to drown more in natural bodies of water like lakes, rivers and oceans, but children, especially young children, tend to drown in much smaller bodies of water like pools, baths, even sinks. It's reportedly the case that an infant can drown in as little as an inch or two of water, and most infant drowning deaths take place within 5 minutes of adult eyes being taken off them. That certainly adds to the fear factor for parents. The reality is that drowning is common for a reason, because it's usually caused by something out of our control. Everyone thinks it will never happen to them until they're the ones panicking in the water. It's almost like a bad car accident. But the thing about fatal car accidents is they happen very quickly, sometimes taking place in such a short amount of time that people's brains can't really register what's happening. Drowning is different, and despite the fact that it can happen quickly, the suffering itself can be quite slow. And all the while, the individual usually has the time for their brain to recognise that they may die before they fall unconscious. That feels important. It's not just that you die, it's that you're aware as it happens to you. Especially during the beginning stages of drowning, unless otherwise incapacitated, a person is often fully conscious of what's going on. There's enough time to recognise one's own death, but not enough time to do anything about it or even say goodbye, and then there's the fear. Drowning is a deeply individual experience. You can be surrounded by people capable of helping you, and yet this crisis can remain all your own. Because it's not necessarily a dramatic thrashing about in the water, as we mentioned, and people nearby don't always notice, which adds to the psychological torment. Just being mere feet from safety, and yet so far at the same time. But don't take our words from it. Hear it from the words of someone who actually experienced it. Chris Broughton shared his story with The Guardian of what it was like to nearly drown in 2013. He was out surfing with friends when he got caught in choppy water as the sun was setting. Here's what he said. Then it really struck me that I was actually about to drown and no one knew. I experienced an acute sense of loneliness and isolation as another wave thrust me down. That fear is accompanied usually with an intense physical pain. The instinct to breathe for a human being is very strong. It's how we stay alive. Being unable to do so underwater heightens the emotional response and the panic. Meanwhile, as oxygen levels further decrease, a desperate need for air, known as air hunger, sets in, which can only increase the feeling of suffocation. Breathing in water is also extremely painful, described by some as having tiny needles or fire spreading throughout your lungs. And falling into cold water can cause enough pain and shock to give a person a heart attack, which of course doesn't help. Chris describes this anguish too. He said, "As I struggled, an intense pain bloomed at the top of my chest, spreading downwards and inwards." In the struggle to stay afloat, disorientation is very common. Even in stiller bodies of water, the lack of air and the intense fight against being submerged contributes to a chaotic and exhausting experience, both physically and mentally. Fatigue can quickly set in if a person panics, or if they're working hard to keep their head above water. As people tire, they tend to start treading water more, staying upright to catch as much breath as they can. Sometimes people drop beneath the water for a second, only for their panic response to give them a burst of adrenaline and the energy to fight their way back to the surface. This can happen several times as a person slowly succumbs. This is what we mean when we say drowning is intense, isolating, and sometimes slow. You have all too much time to recognize your predicament and the knowledge that you are powerless to stop it. Chris discusses his experience again here. A great grey wave sucked me towards it and then broke me like a sack of gravel, bouncing me along the seabed. Desperate for air, I was churned around until I no longer knew up from down. Then the current relaxed its grip, and up I went, just in time for the next big wave to break over my head and push me back under. And then, something different. In several accounts where people have almost drowned, the ending was not chaotic nor painful. The panic gives way to a sort of calm, a serenity, as you realise these will be your final moments on this earth. As people slip beneath the waves and further into unconsciousness, people reportedly felt an overwhelming sense of relaxation. This is why you counterintuitively hear that despite how terrifying drowning is, some people have found the very end to be rather peaceful. Maybe it's the mind and body's way of coping with giving up, knowing it's going to die. Perhaps people are simply able to come to terms with their impending deaths, or potentially we just don't hear very often about the people who die from drowning in a chaotic, scary and painful manner. Maybe it's easier as a society for us to cope with the idea of drowning, knowing that there is a reprieve from the horror of it all, at least at the end. Some people's drowning accounts describe seeing bright colours and lights, others experienced hallucinations, all of which are likely linked to the lack of oxygen in the brain as it starts to die. And if you're lucky, this is the last moment that you can be pulled from the water and likely still survive mostly unharmed. But even after drowning, a person is by no means out of the woods. Believe it or not, even after the fact, a person can actually drown on dry land hours after a near drowning incident. This is called secondary drowning, or the somewhat confusing sounding dry drowning. Chris described this feeling, although it didn't appear to necessitate any further medical intervention at the time, stating, quote, "I sat on the beach, wrapped in a towel, shivering. Someone brought me coffee, but I was suffering from shock more than cold. Breathing became increasingly difficult. I'd escaped the sea, but now felt as if I was drowning on dry land." Now, to be fair, what Chris may have been experiencing instead was a panic attack in the aftermath of a near-death experience, and the water in his lungs, of course, wouldn't have helped. Indeed, one of the most lasting consequences of surviving a drowning is often psychological, even once the body fully recovers. Common effects include panic attacks, PTSD, flashbacks, nightmares, and a persistent fear of water. Some survivors become hyper-vigilant around pools, beaches, baths, boats, bridges, or even the sound of running water. Others avoid anything that reminds them of the incident, while some experience depression, emotional numbness, shame, survivor's guilt, health anxiety, or a lingering fear of suffocation. Some survivors experience dissociative episodes, briefly feeling as though they died during the incident. For others, the trauma is tied not just to the water itself, but to the bodily memory of drowning. The panic of not being able to breathe, the helplessness, the loss of control, the sense of imminent death. In some cases, people try to reclaim that lost control through risk-taking behaviours, overcompensating for the trauma to show that it didn't change them. If the person was resuscitated or treated in intensive care, this can add another layer of medical trauma. Confusion, tubes, alarms, sedation, memory gaps, and a fear that their body has been permanently damaged. Just as every drowning experience is different, so too is every recovery. And for some, that recovery is long, complicated, or maybe even incomplete. In a sense, the body may be pulled out of the water, but the mind lags behind. Many survivors do go on to live healthy lives, often with the help of therapy, coping strategies, and time, but the experience rarely leaves them untouched. It's a very scary experience all around, and an utterly terrifying way to go. So, with all that said, what can a person do to reduce their own risk of drowning, as well as stopping this terrifying fate befalling others? Well, the first thing you can do is recognise the signs of drowning. Key signs include a person's head being low in the water with their mouth barely above the surface, someone holding a vertical body position or trying to climb the water with their arms pushing down can also be an indicator. If a person looks like they're panicking, can't get their hair out of their face, appears to go limp in the water, doesn't appear to be moving with much coordination, or has their head tilted back gasping for air, they could all be signs of a person in serious danger. Don't necessarily expect chaotic and noisy splashing around. People who are drowning often can't shout or wave properly because they're trying to keep their heads above the surface. If you're waiting for someone to scream for help, you might miss it altogether. Spotting these signs are critical. Often those who have near misses with drowning, despite others being present, tell the same story. People thought they were just goofing around in the water and didn't pay much attention. So if you know what to look for, those around you will be much safer. In these scenarios, call for help immediately if you see someone who appears to be showing signs of drowning. You should not put yourself in danger to save others, but you should judge that on an individual basis. If you can get a flotation device like a life jacket or anything like a rope that could pull them back to safety, do it. But be careful. Your best case scenario is everyone leaves unharmed, but one person drowning can quickly turn into two or more when people dive in to save others and get caught in the same trap. Your role can go from rescuer to victim very quickly, and the problem has just doubled. Other important factors focus on identifying key risks that, if altered, can prevent drowning. Is a body of water unsafe to swim in at a certain time of year? How well can a person swim? Are they alone? Has alcohol or drugs been involved? Is the person older or younger? Are at-risk areas fenced off around things like pools and lakes? How cold is the water? Is there access to things like life jackets and life rings? Are there lifeguards around? Even gender matters, by the way. Men are twice as likely to drown as women are. The sad reality is, drowning is often extremely preventable, and just recognising a few of these risk factors and acting accordingly can save lives. In general, people should be in groups. Children close to water should be monitored at all times, with rescue equipment on hand just in case. Even these three things, plus calling emergency services, can dramatically increase someone's chances of survival. But what if you find yourself to be in a scenario where all of these options have failed and you think you might be the one starting to drown? Firstly, be aware of your scenario. Are you swimming in a pool wearing a bathing suit, or did you fall into cold water fully clothed? The window for you to be able to save yourself is manageable, but it closes quickly. So as long as you act early enough, you can give yourself a good chance of not becoming part of a grim statistic. As we said, every drowning is a little bit different, and yours will be too. So whilst these recommendations will work in a lot of cases, they won't work in all of them. And it goes without saying to not get all of your survival information from chumps like me on YouTube. Look up the guidelines as well from reputable sources, because they might highlight distinct factors that could increase your personal level of risk and chances of survival. Where you happen to be, what you happen to be swimming in, who you happen to be, these things make a difference. The best thing you can do if you think you might be in danger of drowning is to stay calm. Panicking can cause you to struggle and ineffectively flail around under the surface, which will quickly sap your strength. So, utilising minimal movement and keeping a clear head can help you preserve your energy for when you need it, and it ensures you can make the safest logical decision when you need to. The next recommendation is simple: get air. It sounds obvious, but the panicked response often comes from a lack of air or when a person swallows water. Focusing on getting a good lungful of air when you can is crucial to avoid the panic. Do not immediately start swimming like a madman, because you'll tire yourself out, and the harder you work, the more air you will need. So, tilt your head back and keep your nose and mouth above the water. This can extend your survival window. At this moment, if it's possible and worthwhile, call out for help to alert people to your predicament. Your next step is to float, but only if you can. Most people will float on the surface of the water if they lay back with their arms and legs spread, which will allow you to keep breathing, but this isn't always foolproof. A person's weight, the clothes they're wearing, and choppy water can all cause a person to become submerged. So plan to float, but don't assume you will automatically. If it looks like you're struggling to float, you should try and tread water whilst alerting for help. An average person can tread water for a while if the conditions are right, but it will tire you out eventually. When you learn how to swim, learn how to tread water efficiently too. Now, if nobody is coming to your rescue and you think your swimming ability is strong enough to get you to safety, you should try and swim away from the immediate danger in as calm a manner as you can, but only if you are sure you can reach safety. Grab anything in the water that can help you float if you can reach it, as this will also assist you with not expelling too much energy until help arrives. If someone is trying to rescue you, let them. Often, people who are drowning will grab their rescuer and try to use them as leverage to ensure they can keep their head out of the water, usually as a result of the panic. This endangers the rescuer and you, because it pushes their head underwater. So try to fight them as little as possible. It could save both of your lives. Then there's what to do if somebody has already been drowning. If a person has undergone hypoxia, and even if they have turned blue, do not assume they can't be saved. The nervous system activates protective mechanisms to prioritize blood flow to vital organs like the heart and brain. This means in some cases, even after lengthy submersion, survival is possible. Factors such as water temperature, depth, and immediate CPR administration play significant roles in survival rates for these kinds of scenarios. CPR can double or even triple the odds of survival, and even amongst those who had been submerged for multiple minutes, CPR can give them a fighting chance. Most sources also recommend to begin CPR with up to 5 rescue breaths to reintroduce badly needed oxygen into a person's body. This is different to most times you give CPR when rescue breaths are not as important as chest compressions. Remember, this is a person critically lacking oxygen. That needs to be the priority. From there, make sure that help arrives as quickly as possible, preferably via paramedics and an ambulance where they can receive medical attention. But be wary of complications from things like secondary drowning as well. A person may seem fine back on solid ground, but they genuinely might not be. Even if it seems like the danger has passed, get them to a doctor so that a judgment can be made by a medical professional. And that's really all there is to it. Drowning is obviously very scary, but through education and information in videos like this one, it takes the power out of the fear, and that really matters, because when it's you, with your head barely above the surface, or dragging someone back to dry land, if you know what to do, you can stay calm, and that could be the difference between life and death. Safe swimming.